Thank you, Lindsay. Hi, everybody. My name is Dio Callahan, and I'm an engineering manager here at VMware Tanzu Labs. As a manager, one of my main responsibilities is to ensure that my team are challenged, learning, and most importantly, happy within their role. During my previous role as an individual contributor, I also took the role of an integrator. Now, understanding firsthand how much work goes into this unacknowledged role and how thankless the important work can be, I'm extremely keen to ensure we begin to acknowledge the integrator's efforts and capitalize on it, which will be the area that I will focus on today.
Great, wonderful. So let's dive in to what our goals of our session are here. So 2 goals. Learn to recognize if you or your teammate is an integrator, and then also further how to advocate and then capitalize on this integrator role. And they're really kind of like the superpower of your product team. Anti-goal, obviously, is we're not advocating for avoiding being an integrator or putting even more burden on this role. All right, so let's dive into the first piece, which is recognition. So this will help you to understand who are the integrators on your team, how do you recognize them, maybe you are an integrator yourself. Okay, so I'd like to start off with a personal story where I played this integrator role. And the role of the integrator term is not a new term, but all 3 of us are really passionate about it. So we were going to share these personal stories and then dive into the framework a little bit. So I was on my product team several years ago, and I noticed every day I was investing this inordinate amount of time of my professional day, kind of emotional labor, trying to really help everyone, whether they're on my core team or teams that we interacted with, to make sure that, you know, there were no tensions, that everyone was getting along, that certain people were heard. And I slowly just realized how much time I was spending on this. So for some context, I was the only woman on this development team, and I just felt very highly aware of our team's interpersonal dynamics, albeit, you know, positive or negative. So what did this come to? I took a lot of informal one-on-ones with teammates. I had a lot of teammates come to me to resolve conflicts, both within and outside our core team. And then I also was the sole person for all these stakeholder meetings and leadership communications with our team. So as you might imagine, I burned out big time. And I think once you hit that burnout level, it's really difficult to recover from. So looking back, I would have done some things differently. And I would also, if I recognized another integrator, would have advocated for these things, encouraging my teammates to just own their own direct feedback one-on-one and kind of cutting me out of it. Second is asking for support from my team, from my manager, from leadership, especially around some of these more intense stakeholder discussions. And then in terms of risk, raising the risk of having one person kind of hold all this context of all of these different relationships. And then obviously the risk of burnout and how that will affect the business, the team, the individual, which Dee will jump into at the end. So with that, let's talk about some of these superpowers that integrators display. So we really believe they are the hidden power behind successful teams and products. They act as kind of this glue between people, between teams and the org, and they have a really amazing understanding of relationships and this holistic view of what's happening around them, maybe some unspoken things. Typically, integrators have a high level of empathy, diplomacy. You might go to them, you feel a high sense of trust with them. And as I mentioned before, they really understand how these micro interactions can affect individuals, teams, the success of a product. And then the final point is they also typically shoulder this emotional labor of the team, and it really kind of goes unrecognized typically. So other examples that you might see of how integrators are showing up, they might be the person who's coordinating these informal discussions to break down silos. They might be the person who's kind of fostering different touch points across your organization. Maybe they're the person who was always willing to onboard a new teammate without being asked. And they're really like the person that is checking in on the team and how everyone's doing. And typically not a lot of people will recognize that. So furthermore, we found this really wonderful quote that I think there's this additional burden for women and minorities who play this role. So it's even more important for us to not only recognize, but advocate and capitalize on our integrators who might be playing this. So in our next chunk, Lindsay is going to talk about how we can advocate for our integrators.
Sweet. Thank you, Annie. All right, let's go to the next slide. All good. All right, so before we get into how to advocate for an integrator, let's talk about why we need to advocate for our integrators. First, Annie's example is a great insight into why integrators are at a major risk for burnout. Again, like she mentioned, since integrators have higher empathy and interpersonal skills, they bear a heavy emotional toll each day that without the right safety measures can snowball into burnout. Also, not only do integrators typically volunteer for this work, but women in particular volunteer more than men. Third, since the integrator role is sometimes a behind-the-scenes glue, some organizations do not know how to recognize this work. And without that formal recognition, your superpowers might not be valued in a way that helps with career advancement in your organization. And last, not only do studies show that women and minorities are asked to take these unpromotable tasks on, but they are more likely to say yes, a key part of it, not only being asked, but also saying yes to it. Next slide. And this quote supports that. Harvard Business Review said that when managers were asked to choose someone to do thankless work, they asked women 44% more than they asked men. And we'll talk about more in the next section with D about how you can be as a manager to avoid this bias. But for now, we're going to focus on the integrator themselves. And to the next slide. So if you recognize someone as an integrator, this first chunk, you might already know some of the roles that they're playing, but you might not know all of them. So have you and your team gain this awareness so that all of you can work together to try and find ways to help this integrator out. Also, don't forget to give kudos to that integrator. Give it to that person, their manager, their team, and even beyond the organization on LinkedIn to make sure that others know the impact that this person is making. All right, now flip to the second part. If you are the integrator, you most likely already have good relationships with your colleagues and might know some of them who would want to learn more about your role and how they can help. One example of this could be mentoring them to take on or share some of your work. That might be one option. Second, if you find yourself feeling that silence after an ask has been made of your team, just take a minute to think if you would enjoy or want to work on this. If not, let that silence live on. This not only helps set healthy boundaries on your bandwidth, but also encourages knowledge to be shared with other teammates. And last, keep track of your efforts or superpowers, like we're calling them, to easily share with your leadership and beyond the impact that you're making on your team and business. And again, all of this, we're not telling you to stop this work or distribute all the efforts to others. We're just trying to raise awareness and start that open communication about the role. All right, next slide. Sweet. So now that we've learned why and how we can support our integrators, I'm going to share one of my experiences trying to navigate playing this role. So in one organization that I worked at early on in my software engineering career, as someone who had just got onboarded, I saw a need for better onboarding. I'm sure you all have seen this before. To make sure the process was better for future onboardees, I took detailed notes of the whole process and tips and tricks on a new team wiki page. The team appreciated it, but instead of giving me more developer work, I got volunteered by the team lead to be our whole team wiki owner. I accepted it immediately because I was so excited for any opportunity to help the team out, but I didn't realize the path that this was putting me on. As more opportunities like this came up, say setting up meetings, chairing committees, helping with recruiting, I always said yes because I appreciated the opportunities and was just happy that I was able to use these people skills that I mentioned earlier. That is until I got feedback from a couple different leaders that I wasn't as technical as some of my peers since I was helping with these non-engineering tasks. Now, although I saw the value that I was contributing, both technically and non-technically, there was no clear way to include these contributions into my software engineering role evaluation. After this feedback, I ended up burning out because I was spending more time coding, but never got to decrease the effort of the integrator tasks that I held. No, that was a little while back. Looking back on this, I would have done a few things differently throughout that journey to advocate for myself and have allies support me. So here's just a few. First, from the very first day, I would have had a career progression and goal setting conversation with my manager to align on our expectations of my contributions. I also would have started a brag document early on to keep track of my accomplishments. Second, as other opportunities arose, I would have paused to evaluate the time involved, my interest and current bandwidth before automatically accepting. For instance, I still would have made that onboarding wiki, but I would have pushed back on being the whole team wiki owner. I could have learned more about how the team currently handles the wiki page and suggested that we split that work up. And then lastly, I would have asked a friend on the team to be an ally by raising their hand in meetings more often so that I'm not the fallback volunteer every time. I'm very thankful for the opportunities, but having that everyday on the ground support would have been huge. And I hope this example helps you and your team advocate for your integrator. And I'm going to pass it over to Dee on how to capitalize on the integrator role.
Thank you, Lindsay and Annie. Now I'm going to talk to you about the final piece of our framework, which is how we can capitalize on the work that the integrator does. But first, we wanted to share another interesting statistic from the Harvard Business Review, who shared that 20 to 35% of the value-added collaborations only come from 3 to 5% of the employees. Now, as managers, we need to ask, do I have an integrator as one of my direct reports? Have they been overlooked for informal but necessary integrator type work that has helped push the team and the products and the company to success? Having been that person who filled the role of the integrator and feeling firsthand all the impacts that Lindsay and Annie have discussed up to this point, I can fully empathize with their efforts. Various disciplines from engineering, product management to testing all fall prey to this type of work that gets overlooked, and research suggests it falls primarily on women. Now, as a leader and as a female leader, it is my responsibility and passion to support this role. Managers can drive real systematic change, and let's look at some of the ways how we can do this. Leaders must start to learn to recognize, promote, and efficiently distribute the kind of work the integrator does. Tracking the integrator work is a real and tangible way to help these individuals support their advancement within their role. As a manager, I can start to capitalize on this work through the following steps. Recognizing and rewarding the extra effort the integrator does. This can start by making others aware of the critical and time-consuming efforts these individuals take on. They are the superheroes of our organization, and they deserve to be recognized. I want to ensure that the team and upper management are made aware of and understand the less visible but hugely impactful work the integrator does. Secondly, through regular cadence of one-on-ones. As a leader, it is on me to listen to the work my report is doing and start to identify what is not written in their current job description that should be recognized. I can also encourage them to tell their story. Keep a brag document, as Lindsay just suggested, of the extra work that they have been taking on, explaining how this has helped their team and the business. Number 3, I can start to identify the tangible integrator tasks so that these are made promotable ones. I can start this by incorporating those tasks I've been tracking during our one-on-ones into their career progression plan. And I can start to map these tasks to the value of the business goals, in turn, making these tasks value-added tasks. All of this will empower me as a manager, as a leader, to take the work into consideration during times such as promotion cycles. Finally, the tasks that I have identified up above, as a manager, I must start to assign these in a non-discriminatory fashion, ensuring the workload is evenly distributed across the team. But what happens when we don't follow the integrated framework Angie, Lindsay, and I have talked about today? Well, the repercussions are real when we fail to recognize the efforts of this role. There is impact to the business, to the team, and to the individual themselves. Looking at the business, there's lack of alignment, decreased relationship building. Projects start to fail as a result, which can impact company revenue. And in turn, there's a risk in increased turnover rate. And what about the team? There can be increased conflict. You'll start to see decrease in creativity and innovation. There's lack of cross collaboration between teams, and projects start to become siloed, and just people stop talking. And eventually you'll start to see team churn. Now the integrator themselves, they start to feel marginalized, disempowered. And as Lindsay and Annie talked about, you're going to start feeling burnt out and emotionally exhausted, which leads to low career satisfaction and risk of resignation. Back to you, Annie.
Awesome. Thank you, Dee and Lindsay. So just to wrap this up, I want to hit on again our kind of 3 chunks of this integrator framework. So first we have recognize. How are we recognizing who our integrators are? Are you an integrator yourself? So really staying cognizant of those integrators, their tasks that they're doing. And this really is a superpower behind some of our successful teams. And then secondly, recognizing these folks so we aren't having major burnout of our individual contributors. Second, advocate. So how are we distributing tasks as a teammate, as a manager? Are we setting healthy boundaries? And are we giving appropriate kudos to these folks who are really doing a lot of the extra heavy emotional labor and lifting? And then finally, capitalize. So as a manager, how are we driving this systematic change to highlight all of the work that these integrators are doing? And how are we taking that work if you have a individual contributor who's an integrator and making that aligned with some of the promotion criteria and making that work visible? And with that, that ends our talk. Thank you for having us here today. And we'd love to open it up to questions with you all. Let's see. Bronca, do you want to take these over? What have we got?
Yes, sorry, I was on mute. So there is one question from Janet. She says she's not a manager, but she self-identifies as an integrator. And she's asking how she can draw awareness to her role to her supervisor.
I'm happy to jump in if you want, and maybe Annie and Lindsay can follow up. So you're not a manager, but you want to elevate the work that you're doing to your manager and draw awareness so that you're recognized for this. I really suggest following the framework that we shared here today. Little things like the brag document that we talked about. You know, keep track yourself of these tasks that are not part of your job description, but without them, the project may not get to the milestone that it needs to get to. And it, like, as we've talked, it's really, really important work and we don't want it to go unrecognized. So I would suggest that you keep that brag document explaining what this work has done and what would have happened without the work, and bring this to your manager, own it, and don't be shy in sharing the wins that you have done for your team and for the business.
Yeah, I would just +1 all of that. I think that's awesome. It does take time too. So I think this is, you know, multiple discussions probably.
Agreed. Yeah, just having that open conversation with your manager, just starting it is the biggest part, and then building that trust and showing the, depending on the goals of your organization, tying them back into how you're making that impact there. Hopefully your manager will help you with that. But if not, you might have to tie that in a little tighter, but you can do it.
Great answers. There's nothing at the moment in the Q&A. I have a question maybe for you guys, or I'm not supposed to say guys, I know. I see that most of those hidden integrators are women. Do you also see men in these roles, or is this something that we tend to do?
I was thinking about this the other day, and I think I'm really lucky that I've worked on teams where there are men who like understand that this is a whole other job aside from like a job as a PM or an engineer. And without even asking, they take over some of those things, or they advocate and say, hey, Annie's done this the past 5 times, you know, I'll take this on, or why don't you, you know, so help take this on for this next time. But I feel like by default, it feels typically like women and minorities, this falls on them. And then I think we were just blown away by some of those statistics where even managers who may not be doing it, you know, consciously, also volunteer these people to do these types of tasks. So
good point. Good point. That we are often given these tasks actually by other people. There's a good comment, actually, it's not a question, but Bonita said, I've identified that integrators are often also fire preventers, which when named and identified gives another dimension to the value of an integrator. And I think that's one of the points of this session, showing how important these integrators are actually, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, I think the other thing is just, you know, how we were mentioning, like typically your integrators really do have this very deep sense of empathy, and they do see all these interactions and actually think about it, and like the effect that it has on teammates and people. So yeah, that's, I think, one of the reasons all 3 of us are super passionate about this, because we realize it's a whole other job preventing fires, or, you know, doing these small little tasks that maybe people don't realize you're doing every single day.
Yeah, Rachel has another question. She says, how do you really know if after having the conversation with the managers that they're actually working to help promote you when you are the only woman in the office? I've had the conversations, but don't feel like I'm getting any traction. It's actually been stated in an interview with a possible new installer that I get everything else that doesn't fall into what the others do. Oh, anyone wants to take that one?
Yeah, I think when I hear this, I can empathize with this as well. I've been in my career for longer than I care to share in public, but when I started, I was traditionally the only woman on my team. And again, what this individual, Rachel, is talking about here, I feel you, I hear you. And I think one of the things that I started to do, and I think Lindsay alluded to this as well when she was talking through her section, was to start to almost encourage others to take on the role and show them. You know, we do pair programming within Tanzu Labs, and it really, there's so many advantages to it. I call it the bus stop effect, that if I'm hit by a bus in the morning and I'm out of work for a long period of time, you know, things can continue, right? But if you're the only person that's doing all these tasks, what happens if you're hit by a bus? So I think you're doing others a favor by actually bringing them on and showing them what to do and sharing the burden. So I think sometimes we need to be strong and push back and get others to help us with these tasks and learn to share the burden a little bit.
Great points, Dee, because Rachel is also saying that she's on the verge of a serious burnout. And I think that's what happens, right, when you can't set these boundaries and take on more and more of these tasks. And I think this is something that others have also experienced. I think initially Annie said she was also on the verge of a burnout.
Yeah, and it's so hard to recover from that. So first, I'm sorry that you're feeling that. I think it also totally depends on what matters to your manager, whoever this is. And I really like how Dee highlighted, you know, because these things do affect the business, right? And they do affect whatever the business quarterly goals are or whatever the team outcomes are. So trying to figure out a way to tie those together first. But yeah, that is a hard spot to be in.
Yeah.
The other thing,
sorry, no, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just saying the other thing that I think that I'm really working on is also like, and Lindsay totally mentioned this and can speak much more articulately about it, but kind of like if I'm in a group, staying quiet and like I am not going to immediately volunteer for that task. I think sometimes as women, like we feel like that's our role or what we should be doing. Because I do like doing this stuff, right? But I think like being okay with being silent and not always volunteering to do a thing and thinking, just like Lindsay was saying, like, you know, how does this help me? How does this help my team?
That's such a good point. Lindsay?
Recognizing too, sorry, Ronka, just being remote, a lot of that also, it's even more hidden, everything that you're doing, right? So trying to make that more aware and speak up makes it even harder. So just having that open communication with your manager, I hope that you have that kind of trust and feedback with them if they're open to it, to voice these concerns, but that is very hard. Happy, you know, feel free to follow up to keep us updated with your progress as you go along. Happy to help any other way.
Yeah, I think reaching out to others who are also in the same situation might be helpful. And I just want to circle back to what Annie said. I think that was such a great point, because I also always feel this urge to jump into the, you know, and take on the job when there's a question. It's just something that we tend to do. And that's something we also have to look at, this internal urge to be the helper and the one to fix things. So I see that there's about a minute left. Is there anything you would like to say to wrap up?
I think just thank you for having us. Please like share this criticality of integrators, and you know, they really do a lot of this hidden, unrecognized work. So yeah, and this was pumped to be here with you all. So
yeah, just to dovetail on what Annie said, we really enjoyed sharing this framework with you and hearing some of the stories and the points from you in the Q&A and the chat. We really appreciate you guys working with us and sharing everything. Thank you. It's been fun.
Any last words from you, Lindsay?
No, Rachel, I wish I could give you a hug. You got this.
Yeah.
That's it.
Well, thank you everybody for joining. And thank you for this amazing session. It was such an important topic, and I loved listening to all the three of you. It was so great. And thank you all for the comments and the questions, and all the best. Stay safe. Take care of yourselves.